Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Sports Scene. This is our 9th episode of Season 14. I'm your host, Trace Tempesta, and today I'm joined by Eli Kleinman and Brooke Rohde. With our first topics today, we're going to be talking about women's water polo and the dramatic season they've had thus far. They are undefeated at this current moment, and I want to ask you guys, will this water polo team finish as undefeated champions?
Yes, they will. They have been the best team all season. They have beaten all the top teams this season. There's no indication that that won't continue for the rest of the season. They've beaten the number 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7 teams to get to this point. They're 14-0, and really they've had some really impressive dominant wins so far this season. You know, obviously a loss can happen, but this team has just been so dominant. I don't think there's any loss that you can point at on the schedule and be like, that's a game they will lose. There just isn't.
I hear what you're saying here, Eli, but I'm not sure I'm buying all of it. If you remember these 2 games against Stanford this past weekend, USC had to go into overtime for the first time this season compared to teams like ASU, and they blew out UCSB and San Jose State. Like, yeah, obviously I can't argue that the USC water polo team is not going to be a contender for the national championship, but I think it's tough to see that they're going to go undefeated. Thinking into this weekend, we're playing UCLA, and UCLA is number 3 in the MPSF right now. They've won against Stanford by 1 goal, so I can see UCLA and USC being a really good matchup this weekend and can give USC a run for their money, especially because it's the crosstown duel. You never know what's going to happen there.
I don't think it should be surprising that the second game of a back-to-back against the same team is competitive, just because once you've seen a team, you really know how to game plan for them. You know how to try and stop them. And so, you know, it makes sense that the game becomes more competitive the second time around. The first time that USC played Stanford, they beat them to 12-8, you know, a pretty solid margin. And so I just think this USC team just has too much firepower. I mean, when you look at it, they have 10 players who have multi-goal games. 4 players have scored more than 20 goals this season, and 6 players have scored more than 15 goals. So they are just a well-rounded team. They are a very deep team.
I hear that too as well. I mean, obviously, USC's a team that once they get going, I mean, the goals are unstoppable. But if we're looking back at UCLA has a young roster. We've got Abby Hill, who's a sophomore, who's coming off of a three goals in the last 9 games. UCLA's coming off of a 4-game road trip, winning 3 out of the 4 against a good Indiana team. So we've got girls like Abby Hill from UCLA, Hannah Palmer, who also is coming in good with goals and assists. So I think if UCLA is able to contend with USC really early on in the quarters, play really good defense against this good USC team, I think that they're going to be able to hold their own against a team that I feel like has a lot of ego right now since they're undefeated. But it's really hard to keep up an undefeated season. It's bound to happen at one point that they're going to lose.
The undefeated status surely adds some pressure, and with the season winding down, the challenges are only going to get more difficult. The team will have targets on their back, but nonetheless, it's an undefeated status. They've earned this point. Eli, what do you think has gone right thus far for the team to the point where you think they are invincible?
I mean, you look at it, they're well-rounded. Usually for this team with this much talent they have, it would take an off day to lose the game. But one player can have a bad day and they'll still be fine. Like I said, they have so many players who can score goals, so many players who can provide help. This is also a very veteran team. You know, all their top scorers are either juniors or seniors. So, you know, a really veteran team who's played water polo for a while. They understand what it is to go through this season. And this team has won a championship in the past. There have been players who were on the championship team when they won in 2018. So, you know, they are used to the expectations. They are used to winning. And they're just such a deep team that I don't really see anyone who can challenge them.
I'm going to go with the underdogs, though. I like Stanford. Obviously, we won against Stanford in both games. I think that's a team that we can't really ignore, though. It goes USC, Stanford, UCLA. Those are the top 3 teams in the MPSF championship. If you're looking at the stats from the Stanford USC game, Stanford had held equal assists, exclusions, and steals with UCLA. The game came down to the wire. Stanford came up big in the 3rd and 4th quarter, and it caused USC to have to come back. They were 2 goals down in the 4th quarter, so they had to come all the way back and then force overtime to win the game, which, I mean, Stanford's got to do better in that sense, but it shows that USC isn't invincible. USC, there's weaknesses in their defense. There's weaknesses in their offense. If they're not getting the assists that they want or the steals that they want, these teams can come through and show their weaknesses in strive.
Yeah, you mentioned that they were down. To me, it shows the resiliency that this team has. I mean, a team that has such high expectations that's been so dominant this season, sometimes when teams are that good, when they get down, they just fold and, they just lose the game. USC didn't do that. They fought their way back. They found a way to win in overtime. It shows me that this team has grit and grind, and they'll find a way to win. That's what the best teams do. That's what veteran leadership will do on a team. And that's just, the icing on the cake for an already enormously talented USC team.
I'm going with I'm still thinking about the crosstown duel, though. That's a special matchup between two LA teams, USC, UCLA. Anything can happen in those games. We lost to UCLA in soccer. Through basketball, that was obviously a good matchup with USC Tajidi hitting that game-winning shot. But there's something special about the crosstown duel, and I think UCLA is going to really come in this weekend at home at USC, and it's just really going to surprise them.
Well, I think, Trace.
Yeah, so Brooke, you mentioned that a crosstown rivalry brings out the best in people. There's no doubt that even as if UCLA water polo didn't want to beat the number one team enough, it also happens to be USC that is the one team. So I understand what you're saying there. Now, when it comes to just having USC lose, because your argument is that they won't be the undefeated champions, do you feel like UCLA is the best shot? And if they are, who else could potentially be this team to upset?
I think UCLA and Stanford are our top three. Just looking at the stats throughout the season, they've been the most consistent throughout the seasons. The games that UCLA and Stanford have lost have been by a margin of 1-2. Stanford's lost to ASU and UCLA, and then they've obviously lost to USC twice this weekend. But the game that they lost to USC this weekend, the second game, again went into overtime. They lost to ASU, I think, by 1 goal and UCLA by 1 goal. So, Stanford and UCLA are just going to be the top contenders to come in and try and knock USC off their high horse. Indiana's also a contender too, but they're a little bit down since I think they're 15th at MPSF, but they're always one to look at too.
I mean, see, obviously UCLA will be coming into this rivalry game ready to play, but so will USC. I mean, they know that it's their rival. They know it's a top 3 matchup. They know that an undefeated season is on the line. I think, honestly, that's what motivates teams is they want to beat the best teams. You want to play the best teams. You want to beat the best teams. USC is going to be ready for that. And frankly, oftentimes it can be a team that maybe is not as high ranked that can trip up the best team because they're not ready for it. But USC has shown that they were capable of blowing out most of these teams. I mean, San Jose State is not ranked as high, but they're ranked. Indiana is another example. USC just has so many dominant wins. They've had so many games that have just been absolute blowouts. I mean, UC Santa Barbara is a team in the rankings, and they lost 21-3 to USC. USC does not take their foot off.
I hear what you're saying in the sense that USC has been dominant throughout the season, but because they're undefeated, that means that they have everything to lose, and these teams that want to come in have everything to win. UCLA and Stanford have no pressure because they've already lost 1-2 games this season. How amazing would it be for a UCLA or Stanford team to come in to USC either in the MPSF championship or a rematch in the NCAA championship and knock this invincible USC team off their horse? So I think, UCLA, Stanford, Indiana, San Jose State kind of, but USC's has all the pressure, and it's really into them to finish out the season strong if they can. But
yeah, we've seen how pressure can magnify in the men's basketball tournament. Gonzaga's undefeated. Every matchup gets more difficult. We've seen how at the end of regular seasons, that's when the pressure starts to build. But Eli, you've mentioned the undefeated status, and you've mentioned that even though this team hasn't lost and faced adversity in that sense, you still think they're tough enough to overcome a team's best play in the most crucial games.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you have the veterans that USC has, led by a redshirt senior and Mamalito, it helps. It helps to have this leadership. It helps to have experience. Sure, there's pressure, but this team is used to pressure. I mean, they've been one of the top teams in the country over the last couple seasons. They won a national title in 2018. Pressure is not something that's foreign to them. They know how to deal with it. They've showed all season that they can win with the expectations. They've been the top team all season long. So I think they're capable of continuing it for the rest of the season and winning a national title as undefeated champions.
For sure. And USC will have their challenges. They play ASU this weekend. I believe they have UCLA on the 24th and the 25th as well. So there are tough matches up ahead. Now, swinging over to USC men's basketball team, there have been some changes on their roster, and I'm going to ask you guys, how do you feel about these changes? From an addition perspective, they're happy to see that Boogie Ellis is transferring from Memphis, who just won the NIT championship. He will be joining them as a guard, and Chavez Goodwin will be staying. Now, in terms of subtractions, Taj Edey declared for the NBA draft, and Noah Bauman decided to transfer to Georgia. So after these additions and subtractions, how do you guys feel about what USC's basketball roster is going to look for the next season?
I think USC's basketball roster is coming into the 2021 season as an excitement. I know a lot of people were probably nervous with the loss of Taj Edey and Evan Mobley, who were probably our best two players this past season. But the fact that we just landed Boogie Ellis from Memphis is huge, in my opinion. I'm a little biased. I'm from San Diego. I grew up watching him at Mission Bay High School, a 5-star prospect coming out of high school and doing well at Memphis. He's still got 3 years of eligibility left. He averaged 10 points per game at Memphis, kind of coming off the bench, not playing too well. If he can get his 3-point shooting up, he's going to be really dangerous. And it's also awesome that Chavez Goodwin's coming back too, to be that potential starter for next season as the big man. And he provides length and tenacity at the defensive end of the floor. So under Andy Enfield, I'm just excited for this next season and how this roster is going to shape up.
I don't think there's any way that a team that went to the Elite Eight but is going to lose a player like Taj Edey and then eventually Evan Mobley when he declares for the draft can be seen in a positive way. I mean, that's their top two scorers. Evan Mobley averaged over 16 points a game, Taj Edey over 13 points a game. And while Boogie Ellis was a top prospect coming out of high school, he really hasn't panned out in the way that many expect. Sure, he's had some nice games where he's put up over 20, but he's also had some underwhelming games where he puts up under 10 points a game. I mean, he only averages 10 points a game. So I think it's too much expectations on someone like Boogie Ellis to see him as the replacement to Taj Edey, because Taj Edey was really a special player, and whenever USC needed a big shot, he was the guy to take it.
I hear you in that sense. I think we just have to remember that Boogie Ellis wasn't Taj Edey. He didn't start at USC, or he didn't start at Memphis. Yes, he only averaged 10 points per game, but he's going to become a sharp 3-point shooter. If he can get his 3-point shooter above 40%, that's going to be huge for our team. Ellis is able to create his own shot. He can shoot from distance, and he's also a good passer. If he can set up his teammates like Drew Peterson and work with Ethan Anderson and Chavez Goodwin and be that nice outlet player that we need on this team, I think he's going to be a really good asset for our offense and could possibly even work his way into the starting 5.
Boogie Ellis certainly could be a nice player, but I don't think he can replace Taj Edey. I mean, you look at it, Taj Edey against Cal Baptist in the opening game of the season, hit the game-tying 3 to send it to overtime. Against UCLA, all USC fans will remember his game-winning shot. And this one may be less remembered, but against Oregon, as they were storming back in the Sweet 16 game, Taj Edey was the player to end the long scoreless drought and keep USC's lead where it was in order for them to win. He not only was the best shooter on the team, but he had a knack to hit the big shots when he needed to. And frankly, with the loss of him, USC loses one of their only shooters on the team. I mean, he was by far and away the best shooter. No one else was nearly as consistent as he was. So while Boogie Ellis has some flashes of being a great shooter, USC really can't afford to lose as good of a shooter as Edey.
Yeah, I hear you in that sense. There's obviously no arguing that Taj Edey was one of our best shooters on the floor. I will probably remember the UCLA shot for years upon years. Tell my kids when I grow up that I saw that. I mean, didn't see it live because of COVID, but I just want to give props to our head coach, Andy Enfield. I think this was the perfect year for USC to go far in the tournament. People only thought they would make the Sweet 16, but they made the Elite 8, which is causing them national attention. And the fact that the transfer portal this year is huge is giving USC every advantage. I think the fact that Andy Enfield struck gold last year with the grad transfers of Taj Edey, Isaiah White, and Drew Peterson and Chavez Goodwin all transferring and all becoming big players for our team last year, I think that wouldn't be surprised if more transfers are added due to the loss of Taj Edey and Evan Mobley. So if Andy Enfield's able to keep utilizing that transfer portal and get guys to come to LA and be big guys on our floor for the USC Trojans, I have all the confidence that USC is going to be a team to work with again this season.
Brooke, you mentioned the success in the transfer portal with the 3 guys you mentioned in Isaiah White and the rest of the group there. I mean, with Chavez Goodwin and Drew Peterson. I think it's a fair argument that there's been success there and you think it'll continue to stay. Now, what does Boogie Ellis need to show from you that will prove that this will be a successful transfer similar to the guys you listed?
I think the way that Boogie Ellis can show that he's going to be a good asset on our floor is just going to be able to work with the other players on the floor. Obviously, coming out of high school, Mission Bay High School, which wasn't really known as basketball school, he was used to doing all the work himself. But if he's able to come into USC and just really be able to work with Ethan Anderson, who might be coming off the bench, but getting familiar with the chemistry between Isaiah Mobley, Chavez Goodwin, Drew Peterson, just coming in and being able to pass the ball well, shoot well, just being a team player and being somebody on the floor that is always going to be somebody to look for is going to be big for Boogie Ellis.
Yeah, I think, we talk about Boogie Ellis when we talk about replacing the guards. I mean, I think, and it's no surprise, and it hasn't happened yet, but Evan Mobley is leaving, and that's going to be the biggest loss for this USC team. I mean, he was USC's top scorer. He was, their best defender. He really was by far and away their best player, as he should be if he's going to be the number 2 overall pick. But there is no person that USC can grab from the transfer portal that can come close to replacing Evan Mobley. I mean, he is a once-in-a-generational type player, and so it's no surprise that USC will take a step back without someone like Mobley. And then you lose Tajidi as well. Now you've lost your top 2 scorers, the only 2 players on the team who average over 10 points a game.
Yeah, I hear you in no surprise. Like, just going back to that no surprise comment, it was no surprise that Evan Mobley was going to be a one-and-done player for our USC Trojans. Coming in from high school, we all knew that he was going to be an outstanding player, going to be top 3 in the NBA draft. So I'm hoping that Andy Enfield, and I have confidence that he did, plan for this. He planned that Evan Mobley was going to be a one-and-done player and has brought these transfers in like Chavez Goodwin and Drew Peterson to hopefully soften that blow for next season. And again, like I said earlier, just utilizing that transfer portal as much as possible. Obviously, Evan Mobley is not going to be easily replaced, but I think through the depth of our team, we used our bench a lot last year, and Mac McClung coming in too, which possibly might be okay. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah,
So here's a question for you guys. I want to ask about this player specifically. I want both your perspectives because I think his decision could make a huge influence on this team. And that guy is Isaiah Mobley. Eli, I want to ask, what's the scenario for you where if he stays and versus if he leaves, does that change your outlook on what you think this season could be?
I still think it's hard to replace what you lost in Evan Mobley and Tajidi, but Isaiah Mobley would make a huge difference. I mean, the loss of Isaiah Mobley would significantly hurt USC's chances next season because you lose your best interior defender, but at least you have another 7-footer who is a quality player, a top recruit in his class. And what Isaiah Mobley showed in the NCAA tournament, the flashes he showed, if he can produce that next season, that will be huge for USC out of one of their big men. His ability to shoot the 3, he does need to work on his finishing inside a little bit, needs to shore that up. He had some excellent looks, though, and so if he can find a way to get those to fall, he'll be a great presence down low for USC. But, there is a solid chance he ends up leaving. I mean, his brother is set to leave, and what he showed in the NCAA tournament certainly will get scouts interested in him because there's a lot of potential there. It may be very raw. It may not be developed yet, but, potential is what NBA teams are looking for.
Yeah, I hear you on that one, Eli. I mean, obviously, Isaiah Mobley, in my opinion, was my favorite USC player in the NCAA tournament. I think he was a standout player. Passed the ball well, shot the ball well when it was in dire situations when he needed to do that. And I think the reason why I think Isaiah Mobley is going to stay is because Chavez Goodwin decided to stay for another year. I think if Chavez Goodwin would have left, that would have given Isaiah Mobley a reason to leave. I know it's hard because his brother's leaving, and it's probably tough to see his younger brother go to the draft before he is. But if I was in Isaiah Mobley's position, I think I'd be excited about the upcoming season, especially now with the transfer of Boogie Ellison and getting these big guys like Chavez Goodwin and Drew Peterson back on the roster. So I'd be super excited if Isaiah Mobley would stay for another year and see what Andy Enfield and this team can do and see if they can make a big run for the NCAA tournament 2 years in a row and upset all these anti-Pac-12 people.
Brooke and Eli, I think you guys both have valid points. I'm glad there was a stress on the Isaiah Mobley decision. I think that's a huge influence in terms of what can stay from last year's Elite Eight run and where do you go from there. Now, for this final segment, we have a hot take coming in from Eli, and I'm going to hand you the floor. Eli, what are you cooking up over there?
This is going to hurt all USC fans, all USC football fans, but USC will finish in the bottom half of the Pac-12 offensively this season. They have shown an inability to run the football. Their offensive line just gets worse. The penalties have been a problem for years, and they lose their top two receivers in an offense that is meant to throw the ball around. Those losses cannot be replaced easily. USC's expectations are way higher than they should be. They will finish in the bottom half of the league offensively this season.
Wow. So I hear what you're saying. It's no surprise that Tyler Vaughns and Amon-Ra St. Brown, like, there's no getting around that they were our two best wide receivers last season, and they're on their way to the NFL draft. But I think the first thing that we need to do is sort out our depth chart with our new offensive line coach. I think it's a bit bold to say that we're going to finish in the bottom half of the Pac-12, considering the type of season we have upcoming with no Oregon and no Washington, and that's technically an easier season for our Trojans. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying in the sense that without our air raid offense and not being able to run the ball well is going to be tough. Obviously, it's going to be tough for our offense to get going and get rolling, but being in the bottom half against teams like Oregon State, Cal, ASU, I know ASU and Arizona are pretty good offenses, but it's going to be tough to say that they're going to finish that low in the Pac-12.
I think you'd be surprised with how difficult USC's schedule will be and how challenging it'll be for USC to succeed offensively. I mean, Arizona State held USC in check offensively till the last couple minutes of the game last season before frankly, Arizona State just collapsed in the last couple minutes. UCLA is bringing back the most production of any team in the Pac-12. And you mentioned Cal. Cal has a coach who is a former defensive coordinator at USC before going to Wisconsin and thriving. Cal's a great defensive team. USC has some tough defenses they have to face, but losing Amon-Ra St. Brown and Tyler Vaughns is going to cripple this offense. I mean, that's 900 yards of offense. And while Drake London is expected to step up, Drake London was facing the third best cornerback on the team on opposing teams last season. This year, he's going to be against the number one cornerback. That's a tough challenge to face. It's not at all what he had to do last year. Last year, Amon-Ra St. Brown was on the top cornerback. Now it's going to be Drake London. I don't think he's going to be able to succeed as much as he did last season at the wide receiver position.
Now, Eli, look, USC has a reputation as wide receiver university. They still have Gary Bryant Jr., they still have Brew McCoy, they still have Drake London, and they're going to gain Kyle Ford back from injury. So Is that core not exciting enough for you to think that this offense can still produce, considering that's 4 viable weapons, and there's 2 subtraction, but you could argue there's still 4 remaining?
I think they're all unproven. No one has shown they could be a star.
Drake London is not. Brooke, take this.
Outside of Drake London, wait a second. Outside of Drake London, no one has proven they can be a star. But like I said, Drake London was the 3rd wide receiver on USC's team. He was against the slot corner. Now he's going to be on the outside. He's going up against the best cornerback. Teams are going to be focused on him. If you focused on Drake London in your game plan last season, Amon-Ra would absolutely torch you. Ask Washington State. He put up 4 touchdowns in the first quarter. That is gone. So when you look at it, Drake London is a great player, but he is not as good as Amon-Ra St. Brown and potentially even Tyler Vaughns, which means he's going to struggle, and he's not going to have as great of a season he did a year ago when he is the focus of for the defenses.
I hear in the sense that he's going to be one of the number 1 receivers for USC coming in, but like Trey said, we got Drake London, Brew McCoy, Kyle Ford, and possibly even Josh Jackson as a big man slot for the Y position. So yes, I hear you in the sense that no one can really out-top Amon-Ra St. Brown and Tyler Vaughns in the sense that you're losing over 900 yards of passing yards, but I think Drake London has something special. He's shifty. He's fast off the ball. He's able to make those athletic catches. I'm never going to forget that catch that he made in overtime against ASU to win the game. That was huge, and I think that really brought him into national standing. But another thing we're forgetting, yes, I know USC is a wide receiver university, but we also have a running offense as well. I know that's kind of a hot take in the sense that USC doesn't really run the ball well, and they're working on it. We've got our big transfer coming in, Ingram from Texas, who had 2 700-yard rushing seasons last year. We've got Malapai, Carr. Everybody overlooks Keenan Christian, and he's an asset for us too. So if we're able to figure out our running offense, get the ball off the line, get 4th of 1, not as scary as it was last season, I think that's just going to be an asset for us as well.
You can't expect USC to be successful running the football, not just because of what happened last season, because of what the offense they run. The air raid offense is not meant to run the football. The air raid offense is meant for offensive linemen to drop back and protect the passer, which frankly they haven't done a great job of even last season. I mean, Keaton Slovis got hurt last season on the final play of the game, and frankly he was always in danger. I mean, look at the Pac-12 championship game. Kayvon Thibodeau was absolute weapon for Oregon coming off the edge, and you lost your best tackle in Elijah Vera Tucker, who's going to be a first-round pick. USC doesn't have anyone coming in to replace him, so the offensive line is taking a huge step back, and the running game just wasn't there last season, and it shouldn't be expected to be there this year either. It's just, in an air raid offense, it is all about the passing. Running is a nice addition, but it doesn't happen very often. Who cares who the running backs are? If your offense is not set up to run the ball, no one's finding a hole.
So, Eli, you obviously have your stylistic disagreements with Graham Harrell and thus the air raid offense. Now, at practice, we recently saw them practicing under center, where Keaton Slovis was changing the offensive schemes. Could that translate to more running? And if it does that change how you feel about USC's offensive production?
No, I don't think they're going to run very many plays under center at all. I mean, sure, they may show it in practice. Maybe they'll run it once or twice a game, but that's not going to make a significant difference. And frankly, you don't necessarily have to be under center to run the ball successfully. Alabama, the best team in the country, ran it successfully with Najee Harris out of the shotgun. So, the best teams find a way to run the ball. It's just, so putting a quarterback under center is not going to change all that much. They won't do it very often. It's just this offensive line is not really set up to run the football, both with the scheme and the players they have. It's just not a talented offensive line that USC has seen in the past. It doesn't have the top recruits nor the top players, and that's a huge concern.
Yeah, I hear you in that sense too, but I feel like this topic's all about USC offense and the fact that that it's going to be the bottom half of the Pac-12 maybe, but we can't forget about our defense. USC's 2020 defense forced as many turnovers in 6 games as it did in the 2019 season, which was almost double. They forced 16 turnovers in 6 games, and I think Todd Orlando deserves more credit than he's getting. It was his first year in a COVID year, didn't have time to prepare, and I think that if our defense is able to get under wraps and play well like they did last season, that's going to help our offense even more. Of course, the offense is obviously a big part because that's where you need to score touchdowns and you need to have a good air raid offense and great wide receivers, but our defense is going to be a good asset for our team just to be solid overall.
Sure, the defense did play well last season, and they will probably play well this season, although I'm not sure the turnover rate is can continue the way it did. But, even when they gave USC good field position last year, USC didn't always take advantage. USC scored on only 27 of 34 red zone trips. And I'm talking about score. That means points in general. That means they got no points, no field goal, no touchdown. And in the red zone, they only scored 21 touchdowns on those 34 trips. You need to do better than that to be one of the top teams in the country, much less the Pac, and as well as the Pac-12. USC just didn't show ability to convert, and a lot of that is due to the run game's inability to find a way to move the football.
I think they have potential though. Looking at last year, we had no spring ball. Coming up this weekend, we have our first spring ball football game of the season. So this is giving the USC offense the number one chance that they need to improve. Obviously, the offensive line has a lot of work to do with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Tyler Vaughn's leaving, but the fact that we even have practice going on right now, I was in the training room yesterday. People are walking out on full pads, like full pad playing in April compared to last year when everybody was sent home because of COVID. We're already at an advantage from last season. So just that in itself, if practice keeps going well, Keaton Slovis stays healthy, and we get our upcoming wide receivers healthy and getting reps in practice, I think this team is going to be something to look at this season.
Great points overall, guys. With a topic like this, where we're talking about USC's offense, I was interested to see if Keaton Slovis is going to be a target in the sense of, Eli, are you saying that he's not going to perform as well? But you were basically picking at everything around him. So I understand the argument there. I still have optimism for USC's football team, but nonetheless, there are stylistic flaws, and changes to be had. Now, for us on the show today, that's going to be all from us. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can follow us on Annenberg Media Sports on all social media. The handle's @AnnMediaSports. And we will be having a show next week. Same time, same day, same place. See you next time.